Vivi lay on the cold floor, her consciousness slowly returning. A man's voice nearby pulled her from the fog. "You go to jail in her place, and I'll marry you," the voice said, firm and deliberate. "What?" Vivi thought, still struggling to wake fully. "Stop playing dead. Speak up." The man's tone turned sharp, impatient. This voice. Vivi's heart sank as she finally opened her eyes, her vision clearing. "Cat got your tongue, Sylvia Murray? Why didn't you say anything?" Came the familiar voice of her fiancé, no, her ex-husband, Charles Lawson. His glare pierced through her as she pushed herself upright, her knees trembling beneath her. "I asked you to go to jail in Eve's place. Didn't you hear me? Now, give me your answer," he demanded, arms folded, his tone cold and unrelenting. Vivi froze, stunned by the man towering over her. This was the same Charles who had once held her hand, promising her the world. Now, he was someone she barely recognized. Before she could respond, another voice broke the tension, a softer, trembling one. "No, Chuck. I'll go to jail myself. I didn't mean to hit that person with my car," said Evelyn Lloyd, her voice faltering as she clung to Charles's arm. Her body quivered with poorly concealed anxiety. "I didn't expect Vivi to call me at that moment. She scolded me for being too close to you. I was so anxious to explain it to her, and then—" Evelyn's voice trailed off, her breaths quickening. Charles pulled her closer, his expression softening. "I know, Eve. It's not your fault. Calm down, sweetie. Your heart can't take this stress. Don't worry. I'll take care of everything for you." "Chuck, you're so good to me," Evelyn murmured, a faint smirk curling her lips as she shot a glance at Vivi, who sat frozen in disbelief. Evelyn's presence struck Vivi like a blow. Memories from her previous life came rushing back, Evelyn's taunts, her cruelty. "Vivi, Chuck and I are getting married. Won't you come back to witness our happiness?" "Oh, I suppose not. After all, you had a miscarriage, Mom and Dad died because of you, and now Charles is mine." Evelyn's voice echoed in her mind. "Mom and Dad adopted me because of you, remember? You begged for a sister to play with, and here I am. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have everything I have today. Oh, and about your kidney, sorry for that. I didn't mean for you to lose it, and I certainly didn't mean for Mom to die saving you. But you'll forgive me, right? After all, I'm your only family now." The memory of Evelyn's cruel words and the weight of betrayal made Vivi's chest tighten. Now, back in the present, Vivi stared at them, her body tense. "Why am I here?" she thought, her gaze darting around the lavish room. "This is Charles's villa? The last thing I remember is passing out on the subway. Why are you just sitting there? Are you too happy to respond, knowing you'll get to marry me?" Charles's biting tone snapped her back to reality. He grabbed her chin roughly, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You're Eve's sister, but you've done nothing but hurt her. If you hadn't called and said those horrible things, she wouldn't have had a heart attack and hit someone with her car. How can you be so cruel? You'd better wise up and take this offer. You're going to the police first thing in the morning and confessing you were the driver," he said coldly. Vivi slapped his hand away, her glare fierce. "Don't touch me," she snapped, her voice trembling with anger as she stood to her feet. "What?" Charles said, clutching his hand where she had slapped him, his expression filled with disbelief. Vivi stood firm, her gaze distant and tinged with sadness. "I don't know what happened while I was unconscious, but this scene has burned itself into my heart. This marks the beginning of all the tragedies in my life, the source of my deepest regret," she thought. In her previous life, Charles Lawson had been the man she loved most. Evelyn Lloyd, her foster sister, had been adopted by her parents as a favor to their friends. Vivi had fallen hopelessly in love with Charles the moment she first saw him. Their families had a long-standing bond, and after Vivi saved Charles's life, their engagement was arranged when they were children. But the truth was, Charles never loved her. His heart had always belonged to Evelyn. Vivi, blind to their relationship, devoted herself entirely to Charles, doing everything she could to make him happy, even agreeing to go to jail for Evelyn. Her time in prison was brutal. She suffered a ruptured kidney from the relentless bullying, leaving her health in shambles. When she was finally released, Charles kept his word and married her, but the union was nothing like she had imagined. He treated her like a stranger, indifferent and cold. Worse, he continued his affair with Evelyn, even as Vivi carried his child. In the end, she left in despair, clutching her unborn baby. Her father's death, caused by the mounting debts Evelyn had orchestrated, broke her spirit entirely. Grief-stricken and exhausted, Vivi lost the baby. It was only at the bitter end of her life that she uncovered Evelyn's treachery. Now, staring at Charles and Evelyn in the present, Vivi's resolve hardened. She wouldn't let history repeat itself. "What do you mean by this, Sylvia?" Charles asked, his brow furrowed as he rubbed his hand, watching her lost in thought. "It means I'm not going," Vivi said, her voice steady and bold, her hands on her hips. Charles's eyes widened in disbelief. "I have nothing to do with what she did," Vivi continued. "She admitted it herself. Maybe turning herself in will earn her a reduced sentence." A faint, bitter smile tugged at her lips, confusing Charles even more. "Even if this is just an illusion before I die, I won't make the same mistake again," Vivi thought. "Do you even know what you're saying? Eve's health is fragile. Prison would kill her." Charles shouted, his frustration evident. "But it's not my fault I'm healthy, is it?" Vivi thought, biting back the sharp retort. Instead, she calmly replied, "I don't care. I have nothing to do with her anymore." Turning to leave, Vivi felt a strange sense of freedom. "How could I have been so foolish to fall for a man who treated me so cruelly? I'm not taking the fall for anyone, not anymore. If I leave now, maybe I'll see my parents again," she thought, her pace quickening. "Sylvia Murray, were you born without a conscience?" Charles shouted, storming after her. "Eve is your sister." Vivi stopped and turned back to face him, her expression dark and unyielding. "Conscience," she said, her voice calm but biting. "Why not ask the person trying to send me to prison that question? First, she's not my sister. We're not related by blood. Her last name is Lloyd. Mine is Murray. She was adopted into my family. Second, not everyone deserves kindness. You know the story of the snake, don't you?" Her words made both Charles and Evelyn flinch. "Why are you being so cruel, Vivi?" Evelyn whimpered, her voice trembling as tears streamed down her cheeks. "We lived under the same roof for over a decade. I've always thought of you as my sister." Her voice cracked as she sobbed, leaning into Charles for comfort. There, Charles said, patting Evelyn's head gently. "Don't take her words to heart." Evelyn's face was buried in his chest, but behind the facade of tears, anger simmered. "What's gotten into Sylvia? She used to do everything Chuck and I asked. Why is she suddenly so defiant?" Vivi crossed her arms, her posture calm but assertive. "I don't have an ungrateful sister," she said, a small, knowing smile on her lips. "Enough." Charles barked, his patience wearing thin. "No, Chuck," Evelyn said softly, looking up at him with tearful eyes. But Charles turned back to Vivi, his disappointment evident. "I already proposed to you, Sylvia. What more do you want? Don't push your luck." Vivi held his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Let's call off the engagement," she said, her tone resolute. Her words hung in the air, heavy and final. "What?" Charles said, stunned, his eyes wide. "Isn't that what you two keep pestering me about?" Vivi replied coldly, her back turned to them. "Fine. I'll quit standing in your way. Let's say our goodbyes here." Her words hung in the air, leaving both Charles and Evelyn speechless. She took a step forward, then added, "And then you can marry your dear Eve." Charles's hands trembled as his face darkened. "Sylvia, what are you talking about?" he demanded, grabbing her wrist in a sudden burst of rage. The abruptness of his action startled her. "Chuck!" Evelyn called out sharply, her hand clutching his arm. Her voice quivered, but her wide-eyed expression betrayed her panic. Before the tension could escalate further, Charles's butler entered the room, phone in hand. "Mr. Lawson," the butler said, bowing slightly, "your mother called. She mentioned your uncle will arrive shortly, and she requests you wait for him in the main house." "I'll be right there," Charles muttered, his tone terse, though his piercing gaze remained fixed on Vivi. "I got so caught up with Evelyn's situation, I completely forgot Uncle is coming home today," he thought, exhaling in frustration. He released Vivi's wrist reluctantly. "Just wait here, Sylvia. We'll sort this out after I return," he said, his voice harsh and final. Under normal circumstances, illegal detention can lead to a prison sentence of up to 3 years. "You sure you want me to stay?" Vivi thought, pulling out her phone and holding it up for him to see, the emergency police number ready to dial. "Sylvia Murray." Charles's voice broke with disbelief as his eyes widened. He seemed genuinely perplexed. "Evelyn, standing nearby, tensed, her eyes darting between them. "Calm down, Chuck," she said quickly, forcing a soothing tone. "I'll take Vivi home. You can deal with your other matters." Charles scoffed, his expression softening slightly as he turned to Evelyn. "Don't worry, Eve. I'll help you in any way I can," he said, letting go of Vivi's wrist before striding out of the room. The moment he was gone, Evelyn's forced composure cracked. Her nails dug into her palm as she glared at Vivi. "I didn't expect this damn woman would offer to break up with Chuck." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "And clearly, Chuck doesn't want to end the engagement at all. But Sylvia Murray, you're going to pay for daring to say no." "Vivi, come on, I'll take you home," Evelyn said, plastering a strained smile on her face as she stepped forward. "No need. I'll call a cab," Vivi replied curtly, brushing past her without a second glance. "Vivi." Evelyn called after her, but Vivi didn't stop. Her confident strides carried her out of the room without hesitation. Evelyn stood frozen for a moment, her forced smile vanishing. Instead, a sinister grin spread across her face. "It's your choice to go home alone," she thought, her eyes gleaming with malice. That night, a sleek black car cut through the highway, its tires splashing through puddles as heavy rain pelted down. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up, swiping back and forth in a losing battle against the storm. "Mr. Lawson, there's a thunderstorm tonight," the driver said nervously, gripping the wheel tightly. "I can't drive too fast. I'm sorry, we'll be late getting to Mr. Charles Lawson's house." His voice trembled slightly as he focused on the road ahead. "That's fine," Tristan Lawson replied from the backseat, his tone calm and detached. He barely glanced up from the stack of documents in his hand. The driver stole quick glances at him through the rearview mirror. "I heard he's Mr. Charles's uncle, but he looks so young. Is this man really in charge of an entire conglomerate?" The thought made him uneasy. Just then, a deafening rumble of thunder cracked through the air, followed by a blinding flash of lightning. The driver flinched, his grip tightening on the wheel. As his eyes adjusted, a shadowy figure suddenly appeared in the middle of the road, illuminated briefly by the car's headlights. "Watch out," he shouted, slamming on the brakes. The tires screeched against the wet pavement, the car skidding before coming to a jarring halt with a soft bump. The driver's heart raced as he stared wide-eyed ahead. "Did we just?" Tristan's voice cut through the tense silence. "Mr. Tristan, I think we hit someone," the driver stammered, his voice shaking. "Stay calm," Tristan said evenly, closing the file and setting it aside. He reached for the door handle, grabbing an umbrella as he stepped into the storm. The rain came down in sheets, the howling wind whipping against his face as he approached the figure sprawled on the ground. His sharp eyes quickly assessed the situation. The woman lay there, her breathing labored, her face flushed and streaked with rain. "Are you all right, miss?" Tristan asked, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. The woman stirred, her body tensing before she suddenly scrambled to her feet. Tristan barely had time to react before she dashed toward him, her movements swift and erratic. "What?" he started, but his words were cut off when she grabbed his collar, pulling him down. Before he could process what was happening, her lips pressed against his, catching him completely off guard. Tristan froze, his umbrella slipping from his grasp as the cold rain poured over them both. They were locked in an unexpected moment, their lips meeting in the pouring rain. Tristan froze for a second before he felt her teeth gently bite his lower lip. Startled, he pulled back abruptly. "What are you doing?" he demanded, shoving her away. The woman stumbled, falling onto the wet pavement. From the car, the driver squinted through the rain-slicked window, trying to make sense of the situation outside. "What's going on?" "I can't see clearly," he muttered, straining his eyes. Tristan frowned, his gaze fixed on the woman as she slowly got back to her feet. She moved toward him again, throwing her arms around him in a desperate embrace. "Don't leave me," she pleaded, her voice trembling and breath heavy. "You!" Tristan exclaimed, his eyes narrowing as he got a better look at her. The rain streamed down her face, but there was no mistaking her. It was Vivi. Her expression was flushed, her damp hair clinging to her skin. She tightened her grip on him, her fingers trembling. "Hug me," she whispered, leaning closer as her warm breath brushed against his neck. Something's not right with her, Tristan thought, his instincts on high alert. "Hug me," Vivi repeated softly, her hand slipping inside his jacket. Without hesitation, Tristan acted. He swiftly grabbed her hands and restrained them behind her back using his tie. Despite her protests, he bundled her into the backseat of the car. The driver watched in stunned silence as Tristan covered her shivering frame with his coat and slid in beside her. "Let's go." "To the hospital," Tristan instructed firmly, locking the door behind him. "But, Mr. Charles," the driver began, confused. "I'll call him," Tristan cut him off, adjusting Vivi gently in the seat and fastening her seatbelt. She trembled slightly, her breath uneven, her flushed appearance growing more concerning by the second. Taking out his phone, Tristan dialed his nephew's number, his expression stoic but tense. "Hello? Uncle?" Charles answered the call, his tone hesitant. "I've run into some trouble on the way. I'm taking someone to the hospital," Tristan said curtly over the phone. Vivi murmured, her voice low and feverish, "I feel so hot." Tristan quickly covered her mouth with his hand, glancing at her with a mix of frustration and concern. "I won't be able to make it tonight. Let your mother know I'll come to apologize in a few days," he continued, his voice firm. Charles furrowed his brow. "Wait, you have a woman with you?" he asked, his tone tense. A flicker of recognition crossed his face as he thought, "Why does her voice sound so familiar?" Before he could press further, Tristan ended the call abruptly. "Uncle? Uncle?" Charles called out, staring at his phone in disbelief. Back in the car, Vivi lay across Tristan's lap, her flushed face brushing against his leg. Her movements were languid as she muttered, "I feel so hot, all over." Tristan's jaw tightened as he looked down at her. "Sit up. If you don't behave, I'll throw you out of the car," he warned, pulling her upright. "No. I'm so hot." She whimpered, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, before he could react, she lunged forward, her lips brushing his neck as she bit him gently. "Let go." Tristan growled, gripping her shoulders firmly to push her away. The driver, who had been trying his best to focus on the road, flushed deeply as he caught glimpses of the scene in the rearview mirror. "I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything," he repeated to himself, his grip on the wheel tightening. "Stop the car." Tristan barked, his tone sharp. The driver immediately obeyed, slamming on the brakes. The vehicle came to a halt, and Tristan swung the door open, dragging Vivi out with him. The driver's eyes widened as he watched through the mirror. Is Mr. Tristan really going to leave this woman out on the street? But instead of abandoning her, Tristan walked to the back of the car. Without a word, he opened the trunk and gently placed Vivi inside, her protests muffled by her exhaustion. He slammed the trunk shut, startling the driver. Tristan got back into the car, rain dripping from his hair and coat as he adjusted his seat. "Let's go," he ordered, running a hand through his damp hair, his expression unreadable. The driver nodded and resumed the journey, his curiosity and unease growing by the second. The next morning, Vivi woke up in a hospital bed, blinking as she adjusted to the unfamiliar surroundings. "Where am I? A hospital? Why am I in a hospital? What happened?" she wondered aloud, sitting up slowly. "You're awake," a deep voice said, startling her. She turned to see Tristan standing a few feet away, arms crossed and watching her closely. She flinched. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "You don't remember what happened last night?" Tristan replied, raising an eyebrow. "Last night?" Vivi echoed, confused. Her eyes drifted to the faint bite marks on his neck. "His neck is red," she thought, her face growing warm. "Did he have an exciting night?" Suddenly, fragments of the previous night flooded her mind, pleading for a hug, holding on to him, the heat, and her actions in the car. Her cheeks burned as she buried her face in her hands. "The images in my head, they're real," she realized with growing mortification. "Sylvia, are you out of your mind? How could you cling to a stranger and leave marks on him?" "Looks like your memory's back," Tristan said, snapping her out of her thoughts. "I assume you're sober enough to answer my questions now." What do you want to know?" Vivi asked softly, her face still flushed. "Who are you? And why did you stop my car last night?" Vivi's eyes widened in shock. "I stopped your car? Why would I?" she stammered, her mind racing. "I'm wondering the same thing," Tristan said, his sharp gaze piercing. "What made you risk your life by stepping in front of a car on a night like that? The driver barely had time to brake. You could have been killed." Vivi's mind reeled as she tried to piece everything together. Her memory slowly resurfaced. That night, she had ordered a taxi, completely unaware of what lay ahead. The driver had a sinister demeanor, his eyes flicking toward her in the rearview mirror. The ride took a dark turn as the car veered off course. Vivi was kidnapped, forced to drink some kind of medicine, and restrained by a group of men. They loomed over her, their intentions clear, but she fought back with everything she had. Somehow, she managed to break free, running into the woods under the cover of heavy rain. The memory hit her like a wave, being pushed off a cliff by one of the men. Her body trembled as she snapped back to the present. The police. I need to call the police, she said, her voice shaky. Tristan watched her intently, his expression unreadable. Are you saying you were set up? Robbed? Drugged? Vivi nodded weakly, her hands clenching the blanket around her. You escaped them, only to run into me. What a coincidence, Tristan said, his lips curling into a smirk. Yes, that's exactly what happened, Vivi replied, her tone serious. Her thoughts raced. So this isn't an illusion. I'm still alive, and these events never happened in my previous life. Am I really reborn? She sat still, her face tense as she tried to process everything. A knock on the door broke her reverie. Come in, Tristan said calmly. The door opened, and a man walked in, his demeanor professional yet warm. It was Tristan's assistant, carrying a small bag. She's awake. Good. Sir, we need to leave soon. The board members are waiting for you in the conference room, he said, stepping closer. Tristan nodded slightly but didn't take his eyes off Vivi. He mused, almost to himself. A woman, drugged and distressed, conveniently appearing in front of my car. Strange how often this kind of thing happens to me. You're not the first one, you know. But I'll give you credit. Your acting is by far the most convincing. His words hit her like a slap. Vivi's jaw tightened as she stared at him in disbelief. What do you mean by that? She demanded. Are you accusing me of trying to seduce you? Tristan's expression didn't change. Aren't you? He asked coldly. Hey, she snapped, her frustration boiling over. You're such an egonormy. Egonormy? Tristan repeated, his brow furrowing slightly as he stared at her, clearly unfamiliar with the term. What do you think you are? Money? Newsflash, not everyone is dying to get their hands on you. Vivi shot back, glaring at him and pointing for emphasis. The assistant stifled a laugh, his shoulders shaking. Leaning slightly toward Tristan, he whispered, You don't know what that means, do you? Tristan remained silent, his gaze sharp. The assistant smirked. It's a word girls use for a guy who's completely average in every way but thinks he's God's gift to the world. Vivi crossed her arms, her glare unwavering. By the way, the assistant added, chuckling softly, that's the first time I've ever heard anyone call you average, sir. Tristan's expression remained unreadable, though a flicker of annoyance crossed his face. Are we done here? He asked curtly. The assistant straightened, still smiling. Yes, sir. Ready when you are. Tristan shot his assistant a sharp glare, making him flinch. Without a word, he tossed a small bag onto the bed. I don't care who sent you, he said coldly, his voice razor-sharp. But tell them to drop their ridiculous plans. If they ever come after me again, I won't be so lenient. He turned on his heel and strode toward the door. Bye, cutie. Hope to see you again, his assistant said cheerfully, giving Vivi a playful wink before following Tristan out. Vivi clenched her fists, her face red with anger. What the hell? Who are these psychos? She fumed. Then, almost begrudgingly, she added, Okay, fine, he's handsome, but his arrogant attitude is absolutely revolting. Egonormy to the core. Her gaze shifted to the bag on her bed. Curiosity got the better of her as she picked it up and peered inside. Is this some kind of warning? She wondered, her mind racing. But I don't have anyone backing me. Who would even target him because of me? Her irritation faded slightly when she saw what was inside, a neatly folded dress. Oh, right, my clothes were ruined last night, she realized, her mood softening. I didn't think that Egonormy could be thoughtful enough to bring me something to wear. After changing, Vivi headed to the front desk to settle her bill. Please pay the hospitalization fee, the nurse said, barely looking up as she handed over the paperwork. That'll be $11,322. Vivi's jaw dropped. What? She exclaimed, her voice rising in disbelief. I was only here for one night. How can it be so expensive? You were in a VIP ward. Don't you know that? The nurse replied flatly. VIP ward. Vivi nearly shouted. Why did you put me in a VIP ward? I didn't ask for that. The nurse sighed, clearly unimpressed with her outburst. The man who brought you here requested it. If you have a problem, take it up with him. Now, please step aside. There's a line. Vivi glanced over her shoulder and saw a few disgruntled people glaring at her. Huffing in frustration, she moved to the side. Ergonormy should honestly be classified as a disease, she muttered to herself. It damages common sense, judgment, and everyone's patience. She glanced at the name on the receipt, her frustration boiling over again. What kind of person thinks I can afford a hospital stay that costs over $10,000 a night? She reached for her purse, only to freeze in sudden realization. Crap. The robbers took my phone and wallet, she thought, her heart sinking as the reality of her situation hit her. What's wrong? The nurse asked, noticing Vivi's troubled expression. I lost my phone, so I can't make the payment. Can I use yours? I'll call someone to help with the bill, Vivi said, forcing a smile. The nurse gestured for her to wait, and Vivi sat down at the reception. I'm not ready for this, she thought, her hands trembling slightly. But right now, they're my only option. Who needs the phone? A security guard asked as he approached. Vivi quickly stood up. Here. Thanks, she said, taking the phone from him. As she dialed, her thoughts raced. I need to call the police too. Those bastards who drugged me can't just get away with it. She reported the attempted kidnapping and assault to the authorities. Thank you for reporting. Please bring your ID to the nearest police station to officially file the case, the officer on the other end instructed. Understood. Thank you, Vivi replied, ending the call before returning the phone to the guard. It's no problem, he said with a polite smile. Vivi sat back down, her mind heavy with memories from her past life. She recalled the bitter fallout with her parents, spurred by Evelyn's manipulations. In her anger, she had moved out and cut ties with them, harboring resentment for years. Yet, deep down, she knew the truth. They had always loved her. Her mom, patient and forgiving, had always stood by her. Her dad, though reserved, had been her unwavering support. She hadn't realized their worth until it was too late. Both of them were gone before she could make amends. This time, I'll protect them. No matter what, she vowed silently, her gaze distant and filled with determination. Unbeknownst to her, the security guard who lent her the phone was watching her intently. He slipped his own phone out of his pocket and made a call. Sir, I gave her the phone as you instructed, he said in a low voice. Good. Send me the number she called and keep an eye on her, the voice on the other end ordered. Meanwhile, Vivi gathered her courage and dialed another number. After a few rings, a familiar, calm voice answered. Hello. Mom, Vivi said softly, her voice trembling. There was a pause. Vivi, is it really you? Her mother asked, her voice lighting up with joy. Evelyn's hand trembled as she overheard her mother's cheerful tone. She gripped her teacup tightly, her expression darkening. Those idiots let Sylvia slip away. I knew she'd call home, she thought, her mind racing as she handed the cup to her father. Why did you change your number? How have you been? Mom and Dad miss you so much, her mother said, her voice tinged with sadness. I don't miss that heartless girl. Tell her not to come back now that she's moved out. Vivi's father yelled, putting down his teacup. Don't listen to his nonsense, sweetie. He misses you like crazy. Where are you now? Her mother asked, concern in her voice. I'm at the general hospital. I lost my phone and don't have enough cash to pay for the hospitalization fee, Vivi replied quietly. What? Hospitalization? What happened? Her mother exclaimed, her voice causing Vivi to feel embarrassed. I can't explain it over the phone. Anyway, Mom, could you lend me some money to pay the bill? Vivi asked softly. Don't worry, Vivi. I'll come to you right away, her mother said, hurriedly ending the call. Vivi sat in stunned silence. What? She muttered, feeling bewildered. Meanwhile, her mother rushed to get dressed. Why did you have to answer her phone? Her husband asked, watching her prepare to leave. She moved out and ended up unable to pay her medical bills. She deserves it, he muttered. But Vivi's mother dashed out of the house, forgetting her bag as her husband yelled after her, Hey, honey, you didn't take your bag. At the hospital, Evelyn accompanied her mother. Vivi's here. Evelyn said, spotting her. Vivi looked up, seeing her mother rushing toward her. Mom, she said softly. Are you okay, Vivi? Her mother asked, worry etched across her face. Vivi, you're finally willing to contact us. Mom, Dad, And I have been so worried about you, Evelyn added, her expression sad. You're worried about me? Vivi said with a smirk. I don't remember you being that nice. Mom, Vivi is so. Evelyn began, her voice pitiful. Vivi, why are you being so mean to Eve? Her mother snapped, cutting off Vivi's words. Mom, it's not my fault. You have no idea what she's done to me. Vivi was about to explain when Evelyn interrupted her. Please don't blame Vivi, Mom. It's all my fault. Yesterday, she refused to let me take her home. I should have insisted, or she wouldn't have ended up in the hospital. Everything is my fault, Evelyn said, feigning sadness as she pretended to cry. All right, you two can find a place to rest. I'll go pay for it, Evelyn said quickly, hurrying toward the front desk. Evie, her mother called after her, but Evelyn didn't pause. As Evelyn walked away, she maintained her pretentious sobbing, drawing attention as Vivi and her mother watched her leave. Eve is really concerned about you. She pushed me to come here as soon as she heard you were in the hospital. If she's done something wrong, try to forgive her, okay? That's what a big sister does, Vivi's mother said, turning to hold Vivi's hands with a cheerful expression. Vivi remained silent, her emotions a mix of frustration and resignation. I know, she finally said, helping her mother sit down. Here, take a seat and rest for a while. Vivi's thoughts churned as she observed her mother. Because of Evelyn's manipulations, her parents still harbored misunderstandings about her. She feared that no matter what she said, they wouldn't believe her. Flashes of her previous life filled her mind, her mother lying weak on a hospital bed, smiling through the pain. Don't worry about me anymore, Vivi. As long as you can live well, her mother had told her, her touch gentle despite her frailty. In her previous life, after being imprisoned, Evelyn had arranged for someone to beat her mercilessly, causing severe damage to her kidneys. The resulting bilateral kidney failure left her needing a transplant. By the time she discovered her mother had been the donor, it was too late, her mother had passed away, and Evelyn was the cause of it all. Vivi forced herself to remain calm as she watched her mother smile, hiding the storm of emotions within her. Meanwhile, at the front desk, Evelyn's mask of concern had slipped. Her face was twisted in anger as she gritted her teeth. That damn woman really lucked out. She actually managed to find someone who could save her in that remote place. Who's the bastard who ruined my plan? She thought, glaring at the receipt in her hand. Her eyes narrowed as she read the name. Tristan Lawson? He had saved Sylvia and even arranged for her to stay in a VIP ward. The name nagged at her. Why does that sound familiar? She wondered. I'll look into it later, she muttered under her breath. Elsewhere, the security guard who had lent Vivi his phone earlier stood at a distance, discreetly taking photos of her. Vivi, sensing something was amiss, stood up and excused herself from her mother. Her sudden movement startled the guard, who followed her cautiously. Vivi walked briskly into a staircase. The guard hesitated before stepping through the door, only to find the staircase empty. Where did she go? He murmured, climbing the stairs in search of her. At the first bend, Vivi stood waiting for him, her calm demeanor masking the sharp awareness in her eyes. Why are you following me? Vivi demanded, startling the guard as she blocked his path. I wasn't. I'm just going upstairs, he stammered, his tension evident. Without a word, Vivi grabbed his phone from his hand. My phone, he exclaimed, reaching for it, but Vivi ignored him and quickly unlocked it. Her eyes widened as she saw pictures of her and her mother from earlier. You took pictures of us? You're so suspicious. I'm reporting you to the police, she declared coldly, her piercing gaze fixed on him. No. Please don't do that, he pleaded, his voice frantic. I was just paid to do it, he admitted. By whom? Vivi demanded, her tone sharp. I don't know his name, the guard confessed. He gave me some money and told me to keep an eye on you and take a few pictures. How do you contact each other? You must at least have his phone number, right? Vivi pressed. He was the last person I called, the guard admitted nervously. Vivi quickly scrolled through his call log and dialed the most recent number. As the phone rang, her thoughts churned. Why would anyone want pictures of me and my mom? Could it be connected to the scumbags from last night? In an office complex in the city, the ringing phone was answered by a calm but curious voice. What's the matter? Any updates? The voice belonged to Tristan's assistant, who hadn't realized who was on the other end. Who the hell are you? Vivi demanded, her tone tense. Why did you have me photographed and followed? The assistant chuckled, his tone light and teasing. "Ah, so it's you, cutie. Who are you?" Vivi asked, her voice hard but tinged with uncertainty. "You've forgotten me already?" "That's a little hurtful," he said mockingly. "We just met this morning, didn't we?" Vivi's mind raced as the morning's events replayed in her memory. "It's them," she realized, her thoughts flashing to Tristan and the stranger in her hospital room. "Does that ring a bell?" the assistant continued, sipping his tea casually. "It's you," Vivi exclaimed, her voice sharp with realization. "That Egonomi's underling. Did he order you to do this? What the hell does he want?" Her outburst startled the assistant, causing him to choke slightly on his tea. From his desk, Tristan observed his assistant keenly. His thoughts lingered on the call, intrigued by Vivi's fiery reaction. "Do you even know who you're calling an Egonomi?" "That's hardly appropriate," the assistant said, brushing off the tea stains on his suit. Tristan, seated at his desk, stood and approached him with a calm demeanor. "It's her, or?" he asked. "Yes," the assistant confirmed with a smirk, covering the phone to muffle their conversation. "The cutie you picked up last night is sharper than I expected. She spotted my guy almost immediately." Tristan's gaze remained steady, his expression unreadable. The assistant handed him a folder with a mischievous grin. "But wait until you see this." He flipped it open, revealing a document. "She's your nephew's fiancé." "What?" Tristan's brow furrowed slightly as he scanned the papers. On the other end of the line, Vivi overheard the conversation. "That Egonomi is Charles's uncle? What a ridiculously small world." Flustered, she clenched her fist in frustration. "Give me the phone," Tristan said, his tone firm. The assistant handed it over with a knowing smile. Tristan brought the phone to his ear. "I'm Tristan Lawson, Charles's uncle. Since you're engaged to him, I suppose that makes me your uncle too," he said smoothly. Vivi frowned, her voice sharp. "Then why did you have your security squad follow me?" "It's a misunderstanding," Tristan explained, his tone calm but direct. "I thought you might be a corporate spy trying to set a honey trap." Vivi blinked in disbelief. "And am I in the clear now?" she asked, her irritation barely concealed. "Of course," Tristan replied. "It's impossible for Chuck's fiancé to do something like that." Vivi exhaled a sigh of relief, though her irritation lingered. "Thanks for saving me yesterday. I'll find a way to repay you when the time comes," she said curtly. Then, with a defiant edge, she added, "But for the record, I'm about to call off the engagement, so you don't get to be my uncle." Without waiting for a response, Vivi tossed the phone back to the security guard and walked off briskly, her expression tense. "What rotten luck," she fumed inwardly. "This Egonomi is Charles's uncle? But he doesn't even look that much older than me." Her face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and frustration as she hurried away. "It's okay, Sylvia. Once the engagement is called off, you'll never have to deal with this cockier uncle again," Vivi thought to herself, clenching her fist in determination. "She's already hung up?" Tristan's assistant asked, returning to his seat. "What did she say?" "Something about breaking up with your nephew." Tristan's gaze remained on the document in his hands. "I heard this girl is really into Chuck. Why would she want to call off the engagement?" The assistant shrugged, a knowing smirk on his face. "Well, word is she was smitten, but Charles doesn't exactly treat her well. Rumor has it he's got his sights set on Evelyn Lloyd, the adopted daughter of the Murray family. He's been busy wooing his new love." "Evelyn?" Tristan asked, his interest piqued as he sat up. "Yeah," the assistant replied, leaning back. "She's the delicate, meek type. Evokes that sense of protectiveness, you know? She's like a fragile lamb compared to that fiery cutie you met." Tristan raised an eyebrow. "Oh? She's your type then?" The assistant flushed, flustered. No. I prefer strong, assertive women," he stammered, waving his hands defensively. Tristan barely reacted, his gaze dropping back to the document as memories resurfaced. He recalled the fire incident from years ago, the day he first saw Vivi. She had staggered out of the flames, supporting Chuck on her shoulder. "Help him, help Chuck," she had pleaded, her voice weak and trembling before collapsing into his arms. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Evelyn was chatting with a nurse in Vivi's room. "It's a little embarrassing," Evelyn said, feigning concern. "But my sister is, well, very open. She spends a lot of time in bars with the wrong crowd. It's not exactly surprising that she got drugged." Outside the door, Vivi stopped abruptly, her ears catching Evelyn's words. Really? The nurse replied, her voice hushed. She was all over some man last night. I think they called him Mr. Lawson. Vivi's eyes narrowed as she pushed the door open, her sudden entrance startling both women. Vivi. Evelyn gasped, her face pale as she quickly glanced at her sister. Vivi smiled, her tone light but edged with a sharpness that made Evelyn tense. What are you gossiping about? You look so cheerful. Mind if I join you? What are you doing here, Vivi? Evelyn asked, forcing a tense smile as the nurse beside her shifted uncomfortably. I'm leaving the hospital soon, so I came to pack my things, Vivi replied calmly. Why don't you continue your conversation? The nurse quickly excused herself. I have something important to do. See you. She hurried out of the room. Don't get me wrong, Vivi, Evelyn began, her voice defensive. I'm here to pack your things too. I was just having a little chat with the nurse while I worked. Drop the act, Evelyn, Vivi said coldly, her gaze sharp. You think I don't know what you're up to? You want Charles. I already said I'd call off my engagement. Now that I have nothing to do with him, you can stop your dirty tricks. She stepped past Evelyn, her tone leaving no room for argument. Evelyn's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. What are you talking about, Vivi? How could I possibly have feelings for Chuck? To me, he's just my future brother-in-law. Besides, haven't you always wanted to marry him since you were a kid? Her tone was sweet, but there was a pointed edge to her words. Vivi paused, her hand hovering over her gift bag. Memories of betrayal flashed in her mind. I once thought I had the loveliest little sister in the world and the man I loved most by my side. I did everything for them, only to realize I was just a puppet, manipulated by the people I trusted most. Her eyes hardened as she turned to Evelyn. That was the past. I don't care about him anymore. Once the engagement is cancelled, you're leaving the Murray family. We won't cross paths again. Evelyn's expression shifted, panic flickering in her eyes. What? Leave the Murray family? Is this some kind of joke, Vivi? Why would you make such a request? You, Mom, and Dad are my only family. Where would I go? She asked, her voice trembling as she tried to look pitiful. That's not my concern, Vivi replied, her tone cutting. Maybe you can move in with Charles. You love each other, don't you? She picked up her bag and walked past Evelyn. No, Vivi, you've misunderstood. Evelyn quickly blocked her path, grabbing her arm in a show of affection. Chuck only sees me as his little sister. He and I both care about you the most. How could we ever betray you? This trick again, Vivi thought, narrowing her eyes at Evelyn's fake smile. She always pretends to be cute and obedient whenever she's in trouble. I was so blind in my previous life, only discovering her true nature in the end. When did she start harboring such ill intentions toward me? Enough with the charade, Vivi said, shaking off Evelyn's grip as she walked to the door. Pausing, she glanced back over her shoulder. Make a guess, Vivi said coolly. If Mom and Dad find out you wanted me to take the fall and go to jail for you, do you think they'll still treat you as their daughter? Evelyn froze, her face draining of color as Vivi left the room, slamming the door behind her. Evelyn's gaze darkened with anger. That fool always acts superior. Just because she has parents doesn't mean she's above me. Her thoughts swirled as she stared at her phone, where a message from the nurse awaited her. Opening it, she saw incriminating photos, Tristan carrying Vivi into the hospital. A twisted smirk spread across her face. Sylvia Murray, I'll destroy everything you hold dear, little by little. When your parents' protection is gone, you won't be able to hold your head high anymore, she thought, her eyes fixed on the images. Later that evening, they arrived at the Murray family villa. We're finally home. Ms. Lewis, is Vivi's room ready? Vivi's mother asked cheerfully as they stepped inside. Take a rest, Vivi. I'll go check on your room, her mother said with a warm smile before heading upstairs. Vivi lingered in the sitting room, her eyes wandering over the familiar walls adorned with pictures from her childhood. She picked up a framed birthday photo, her younger self beaming between her parents. This home is still the same as I remember, she thought, her fingers brushing the frame as memories flooded back. Today is Vivi's birthday. You can have whatever you want, honey, her dad had said cheerfully, ruffling her hair. Daddy, I want a little sister to play with me every day, she had replied happily. Her smile faded as another memory surfaced, her mother's anguished face during the court trial in her past life. My daughter is the kindest girl in the world. How could she be involved in a hit and run? There must be a misunderstanding, her mother had pleaded desperately. The image shifted again, this time to the airport. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Don't leave, Vivi. I can take care of you if you stay at home. I'm sorry, Dad, she had said, rolling her luggage away. But staying at home will only make me feel worse. I need a new environment to move on. Vivi. Don't leave Dad alone. Vivi, he had called after her, but she hadn't turned back. Her chest tightened as guilt swept over her. In the past, I took my parents' love for granted. I never truly considered their feelings. After breaking up with Charles, I even left my father behind, insisting on going abroad. When he was lying alone in the hospital, did he resent me? Her fingers trembled as she stared at the photo. So money is the only thing that can bring you back, her. A familiar voice broke her reverie. She turned abruptly. Dad, she said, startled to see him seated in the armchair behind her, sipping tea. What? You can't even recognize your own dad after being gone for a few days, he asked. Dad, I'm back. Vivi exclaimed tearfully, rushing to embrace him. Her sudden action startled him. What's wrong? Are you being bullied? He asked, worried, as he gently wiped her tears. No, I just missed you, Vivi said with a cheerful smile. Then why didn't you come back sooner? What happened exactly? Why were you hospitalized? He asked, his voice calm but concerned. I'm fine now, Dad, she reassured him, smiling. Before he could respond, Evelyn interrupted tensely. Dad, I heard from the nurse that Vivi was sent to the hospital by 2 men. What? All he said, startled. They left Vivi there and went away. She couldn't pay the bills because she lost her phone and wallet, Evelyn added, looking sorrowful. 2 men, her father roared, his expression darkening with fury. Vivi's gaze remained calm. In my previous life, I never realized how Evelyn cleverly stirred every quarrel between me and Dad, she thought. What the hell did you do out there, Sylvia? Her father demanded, his tone sharp. What are you thinking about, Dad? Vivi asked softly, taking his hand. Those 2 men were just passing by and kindly took me to the hospital, she said gently. Really? You wouldn't have been in so much danger if you hadn't left home, he scolded lightly, tapping her head. Oh, that hurts, Dad, she cried out playfully, rubbing her head. I know I was wrong. I won't run away from home again and make you worry, she said, smiling and blushing. That's more like it. Now you know how happy you can be at home, don't you? He said, clearing his throat as his anger faded. Of course. Mom and Dad are always my strongest support, Vivi replied joyfully. Standing to the side, Evelyn clenched her fists discreetly, already scheming her next move. Oh, right, Vivi. Aren't you going to tell Dad that you broke off your engagement to Chuck? Evelyn said suddenly, pretending to look shy. What? Her father exclaimed, his eyes wide. Why? Didn't you say you wouldn't marry anyone but him? When you finally got engaged, you changed your mind. Marriage is a serious matter. Stop acting like a petulant child. Calm down, Dad. You may trigger your hypertension again, Evelyn chimed in with a sad look. Yes, calm down, Dad, Vivi said, her tone soothing as she guided him to sit. I was about to tell you and Mom about this. I've thought it through, she added, meeting his gaze with determination. Getting married is a lifetime commitment, and I don't think Charles and I will be happy together, Vivi explained calmly. On what grounds? You 2 grew up together. He should know you better than anyone else in the world, her father countered, his tone firm. Vivi hesitated, searching for the right words but unable to find them. Enough, her father interrupted, shaking his head. This isn't something to be taken lightly. Let's put the matter on hold for now. Just stay home and rest these days, he said decisively. Sure enough, it's not that easy to call off the engagement, Vivi thought. After all, we got engaged when we were kids. Convincing Dad without a solid reason will be difficult. All right, she replied faintly, lowering her gaze. And it's not just Dad, I don't think the Lawson family will accept it either. There has to be a reason they can't refute, Vivi mused silently. Evelyn, still standing nearby, glanced at Vivi with a mix of confusion and unease. Sylvia's offering to call off the engagement, but why is everyone trying to stop her? And what's gotten into her? She's like a different person these days. She's always wanted to marry Charles, so what's made her give up so suddenly? Is she up to something? Evelyn thought, her mind racing. Vivi's calm voice cut through Evelyn's spiraling thoughts. You care so much about me, Eve, Vivi said, her tone soft but pointed. But don't you also have something to tell Mom and Dad? Evelyn flinched, caught off guard. Huh? What are you talking about, Vivi? I don't have anything to say, she replied, her voice tense as she instinctively stepped back. No? How can you keep such a big thing inside? Talk to us, we'll figure out a way to help you, Vivi said, her tone deceptively gentle. Vivi stepped closer, softly holding Evelyn's hands, her gaze calm but piercing. You hit someone with your car, didn't you? Evelyn froze, her expression turning pale as panic flickered in her eyes.
Thank you for joining us on this incredible adventure. If you enjoyed what you watched, please consider liking, subscribing, and ringing that notification bell. Your comments mean the world to us and help us improve. The next episode promises even more excitement and unexpected twists, so stay tuned as we embark on this thrilling journey together. Keep the anticipation alive, and we'll catch you in the next episode.